Welcome to the Bluffton BibleCast. We hope that you have had an amazing Christmas holiday and are as excited as we are about studying God's Word together in 2025. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the righteous shall live by faith. But what does a life of faith actually look like? This year, join us as we meditate on the wisdom literature of ancient Israel and the teaching of the apostles of Jesus Christ. I'm Taylor Kirshner, and I'm here with Darren Dreyer and Joe Lehman to get you excited for the 2025 Bible reading plan.
Okay. Between now and April, we're going to be reading ancient wisdom. I'm talking Proverbs and Job
And wait a second, Darren. There may be some new listeners this year. Let's tell them what the Bluffton BibleCast is all about before we jump into the reading plan.
Okay, that's good thinking. I'm just so pumped.
Thanks for your patience, Darren. Dear listeners, as you know, the Bluffton BibleCast is a short weekly podcast that accompanies the church-wide Bible reading plan for the Apostolic Christian Churches in Bluffton, Indiana. We're just a small group of brothers and sisters hoping to provide some insight into the context of our scriptures so that we all may better understand and comprehend what we're reading each week.
Following that point, our podcast is not meant to give life application or be a weekly devotional.
Right. We want to share knowledge about the literary structure, cultural background, and highlight important themes as we follow the reading plan. Our prayer is that you, our listeners, will be challenged to dig deeper into God's Word and find application for yourselves.
Right. All right, Darren, now you can have the mic back. What does the reading plan look like this year?
Well, as I was saying, we're going to be reading wisdom literature here in the beginning of 2025. The book of Proverbs will take us through January, and then start in the middle of February, we'll be tackling the book of Job and Ecclesiastes.
I'm excited to study through some of those, shall we say, less than positive books of the Bible.
Me too. And that's what we're all about here. After Easter, this year, our reading plan switches to the New Testament. We're going to be reading the Gospel of Luke and Acts. And start in the middle of July, we'll begin reading through the epistles.
Ah, yes, wisdom from both the Old Testament and the New.
So Darren, last season we explored apocalyptic literature in the Bible. And this year's theme is a life of faith. Is there a connection between the two?
There is a connection. It all starts with the most mispronounced book in the Bible.
I'm guessing you aren't referring to Job. I mean Job.
Correct. I speak of my favorite prophet, Habakkuk, or Habakkuk. God gave Habakkuk an apocalyptic vision of the impending devastation of Judah by Babylon.
That's a hard message to hear, but we learned last season that an apocalypse gives hope to those who receive it. What hope did Habakkuk give in his apocalypse?
God promised to punish Babylon for their wickedness, and he told Habakkuk that the just shall live by his faith.
So when God says the just shall live by his faith, does that mean that they will live because of their faith as opposed to being punished for their wickedness?
Yes, that's true. However, the idea of living by faith has many avenues to explore. It's wrapped up with the concept of God using unjust people, such as Babylon, to perform his will. God tells Habakkuk that he will ultimately judge all wickedness, and his followers are to have faith that he's working everything out.
Okay, so when a man or woman comes to faith in God, they then live by their faith. They believe that God exists, but it's more than that. Living by faith is a life that understands that God's character and his faithfulness in the past demonstrates that he will be faithful in the future.
Exactly. And the authors we read this year will wrestle with that concept. Job's friends, for example, were convinced that his torment was a result of his own sin. They thought good people have good fortune, and bad people had bad fortune. This is the same concept that the persecuted church had to deal with in the book of Acts. The apostles had to trust that God was in control, even when they were being crushed by persecution.
So this is good. The epistles are included in our reading plan this year because they match the theme. It helps flesh out this idea further, I think.
Yeah. In fact, Apostle Paul quotes Habakkuk in both Romans and Galatians to make his point.
So right now, Cedarmont Kids is our go-to listening with our girls in the van. I'll spare you me singing it unless Darren wants to give it a go.
Well, I left my pitch pipe at home, so...
The lyrics begin, God said it, I believe it, it's all that faith demands. And that song has been stuck in my head as I've been studying the topic of wisdom literature lately. The authors and speakers in Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job wrestle with this idea throughout their pages.
It's a simple idea, and it's kind of easier said than done. It may not be easy to follow God's word, but we should believe it because he's our God and he has said it.
Correct. I think the key to what you said there, Joe, is it may not be easy. A lot of times if you read Proverbs, at least if you read it alone, it would be fairly straightforward.
Right. Here's what you should and shouldn't do. There's a lot of great life application.
Yeah, I was watching some videos and listening to a podcast by the Bible Project, and I love how they explained wisdom literature. Now bear with me, but imagine you walk into a room and see 3 people named Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Job.
Yes, I watched that series. I love this analogy.
So if you're looking for good parenting advice, relationship advice, or general life wisdom, you'd probably go to Proverbs. She'd be your girl.
Girl. Cooties. Why the female connotation?
I believe it has something to do with Proverbs referring to lady wisdom.
Darren, this podcast would be so boring without you. Yeah, I think of Proverbs as an optimistic teacher filled with great advice. But look out. Right beside her is Ecclesiastes, and he'll want to have a say too.
And it'd probably be something more cynical, like everything under the sun is meaningless and all that.
Right. Yeah, the Bible Project refers to Ecclesiastes as like a sharp, blunt critic. Just because you do everything right does not mean you will do well in life, like Proverbs would say.
And then Job is, well, Job.
Right. He'd be the weathered older man shaking his head at the optimism of Proverbs and the cynicism of Ecclesiastes. He's lived in both worlds, and he came out on the other side trusting God, even when life didn't go his way.
Reading these 3 books together is essential, because reading one without the others could lead to some simplistic thinking.
Reading wisdom literature as a set helps us to wrestle with the complexity of our faith and righteous living. God said it, and we believe it, but it's like we said earlier, it isn't always that easy.
So I want to ask, even though I think I know the answer, are these 3 the only wisdom literature in the Old Testament?
Good question. So Song of Solomon can often be included in this category. Wisdom literature in the Bible steps away from the historical narrative of the Old Testament. It generally seeks to answer questions like, how should I live? What can I expect if I live wisely?
Song of Solomon isn't quite as overt in this area then, but it does have Solomon in common with Proverbs and Ecclesiastes.
Which is why we didn't include it this year.
Well, that, and it can make even the toughest guy blush.
True. I guess we didn't really have anyone lining up to cover that book on a podcast. All joking aside, though, this year will be one that helps us learn to wrestle with the text a little more than our modern culture is used to. We are so used to having all the answers at our fingertips with Google, smartphones, all those things. But these texts encourage us to not have the exact answers, to embrace some unknowns and acknowledge that a life of faith isn't always a prosperity gospel mindset.
And like we said earlier, we're going to read that Jesus' apostles and his first followers didn't exactly have an easy life. The book of Acts could make some of the Proverbs seem false. The apostles were doing what was right and living by faith, but facing persecution instead of prosperity.
Which can bring a lot of questions, but I think that's the beauty of this year. As Christopher Wright, an Old Testament scholar, says, these texts will, quote, compel us towards an honest faith that's willing to acknowledge the presence of doubts we cannot dismiss and questions we can't always fully answer given our human limitations.
Faithful listeners, we're very excited to start a new year in God's Word. We can't wait to learn the wisdom of Solomon and the apostles of Jesus, the man of God himself. Grab a reading plan at church and let's get into it right here next week. God bless and Happy New Year.